All right. So, Konstantin, this was awesome. I mean, I really enjoyed. I just want to like circle back to what we just heard, and I think that the presentation that Konstantin gave is like very inspiring, and also just like coming from my side, because like what you said, even like I'm working at a company. Basically, I have my 9 to 5 job. Um, like listening these experiences where people are managing to do their work from like remotely and not being bounded to like one single place is very amazing, and it feels like wow, I would love to be there actually. But anyways, thank you for having me, and I mean this is a great opportunity for me as well to share some of my experiences, and also to showcase some of the work that I've been doing for the past, well, now 18 years. It's been a while. um, and I mean, you guys are seeing this. This is my opening slide. This is the title of my presentation. And like, I was actually thinking, like, what would be the best way to showcase and like give you a little bit more in depth of like what creative process means to me, and like how I got to being where I am, and like how I'm actually like dealing with my processes. And I was thinking like basically like not doing through the lens of like what I actually did, but actually like doing this through the lens of things that I haven't learned. And I mean like those things that I haven't learned are actually as important as those that I did. So in order to do this, I'm just going to take you a little bit further back into the past, and I just want to like circle back the things that I like, how I started, and like how those things got me to this point. So I was born in 1980s in former Yugoslavia. I was a kid of my father was a graphic designer, still is, which back in the day was a pretty odd thing to do. Like nobody understood what actually graphic designers did, and there was couple of places in Serbia that and like not only in Serbia but in Yugoslavia that actually did graphic design work. And to a mother, she used to be French teacher, and afterwards in life, like she did a lot of culture and so on. So I basically like grew up in the 80s, and the year that I was born, this guy who was basically the leader, I mean, he died, and like you can imagine how unfortunate it is to be born in the same year that this guy died, and like a lot of people used to love him. So yeah, it was a little bit unfortunate from my side. But anyways, this is like one of the things that basically along the way got me thinking of like what is the influence and what is the praise of people, and like people that we look onto. So as a lot of people were looking onto him, they were also looking into like culturally relevant public figures as was Brena, and like so many more within the cultural field. But also like these were the heroes of some sort of like era of my like uprising, like my growing, and I was 11 years old when this thing happened. But somehow like all these things like never stuck to me, and like I never could understand quite well like what was so important about those things that like so many people got drawn to it. But I just like kind of like never could reflect myself upon those things. And this is like something that actually brought me to the first thing that I want to talk to you. I want to explain you, and this is something that's very important for me in my work, and that is the importance of influence and culture within my at least like my experience, and like the things that got me to do work and create work that I'm doing. So this started with a really like I wouldn't call it an accident because I don't believe in accidents, but I wouldn't call it fate as well because I think it's too far fetched and it's a little bit it's a little bit debatable because it gets a little bit further down the line. But one morning I can't recall if it was 91 or 92, but I'm going to say 92. I was waking up early in the morning, waiting to go to a field trip with my school. So I was 11, 12 years old back then. And I was watching the third channel, which was actually broadcasting MTV every morning from like 7 a.m. till 10 p.m. or something like that. And this happened. I heard this track and I heard this sound, and for the first time, I got drawn to something visually, and like by visual and by audio stimulus, and I couldn't believe that like something so simple and yet like so sudden like caught my attention and completely shaped the future of who I'm gonna be and who I'm gonna become. And so down the line, I really like little did I know that 2 years after this, I'm gonna be at the spot. So this is 4 years later, in December 8th, 1995, after the war ended in former Yugoslavia. I was at the concert of the first international band that came to Serbia after the war. And this is the first time actually they even play this song. And just like for me as a kid, seeing and listening to that kind of culture and being involved afterwards and having the opportunity to be at this place in this moment and experience something like this like completely shaped the following year. That's when I actually started sort of like my teenage age of just like going out and going to the parties, and that's where I discovered that culture and the relevance of culture and the relevance of music in my life is going to be something that's going to shape me so hard. And basically that same year in 96, another thing happened to me that was really important, and that was this movie. I'm just going to let you listen to this if you haven't seen it. This is from The Hate Line.
Jusqu'ici, tout va bien. Jusqu'ici, tout va bien. Mais l'important, c'est pas la chute.
And this quote got me thinking a lot because it's a really nice way to say like what actually means the whole sort of direction and your path of working and living. And I understood this for later on. Of course, I didn't like get those things right away. But also besides this quote, like there was this funny guy who was actually not funny who appeared in the movie. And this is actually a really nice thing because Matthew Kasovitz, who directed the movie, actually I afterwards in Paris had an opportunity to meet and frequent him and some of the crew that he was working with and so on, which actually leads me to a next phase of my life. And that's basically going to Paris and moving to Paris in 96. So like this year, the year 96 was pretty important just because of so many movement and motion. So I started going out, experiencing the culture, the nightlife, all those things. But also another thing was moving from one cultural entity, which was Belgrade, and which was completely devastated by the whole situation we were stuck in. going basically to Paris, which is the city of lights, city of art, um, a really busy place, and in particular with culture. I got into technical design school, Auguste Renoir. That's one of the few schools that actually have graphic design as as sort of like a subject within a school that's like high school. Just prior to this, I'm just sort of like pivoting, like going back and front. In '95, I did get into in design school in Belgrade. So I did get there, and so that's basically how I started. So afterwards, I just like transferred to Auguste Renoir when I moved to Paris. But the thing that actually happened next is something that I started learning with my with the first years of being in Paris and experiencing completely different environment, because I used to travel while I was a kid, but it was mainly like traveling for vacation or like going to visit someone for at least like mostly like a week or 10 days. But this was the first time that I actually moved and had the chance to really experience something different than being in Belgrade. And for a 16-year-old, not even a 16-year-old, I was 15 and a half. Experiencing a new environment, and especially in the moment when you started like getting into all these new influences and like doing all these new things, surrounding and context can actually really differ. And for me, surrounding and context in terms of traveling to Paris, first experience was I lived in an era where you could actually still smoke on flights, and that was that was a really interesting thing. Like, and even looking from today, um, it's like it seems like this never happened, but actually it did. But also another thing that actually is really important is that I actually continued my um, sort of my musical journey, and this is where I actually started experiencing the importance of musical culture and pop culture in particular, especially in my work. I started like experiencing this as a sort of like major force and influence. And all up until this day, even today, I think like without music, I'm not able to work. Whenever I listen to the music, and whenever the beat is sort of like up tempo, like that's when the sound sort of like drives me, and I kind of like get into this moment of zen where I can just work nonstop and feel good about it. And this place was actually my mecca. This is somewhere where I spent like all my Thursdays and Fridays. Saturdays were sort of like not my musical style, but Thursdays and Fridays were basically my days, and I was regular at the Rex Club. And this actually led me to another thing. And this is the second place that I used to spend a lot of time at. It's a record shop, one of the biggest in downtown Paris, and I used to love going to this place every weekend. Like, if not buying records, just listening to the music, meeting with people, talking to people, and this importance of again culture and intersection of culture and music is what was really relevant. And so besides on one side you were having like this, I was having this club culture and very inspiring sort of like the visual world that was built around with all the flyers and I don't know, like how the events were built and like all these small details. And then a next thing were actually record sleeves and record covers. And in electronic music, there is one thing which sets it so much apart than any other different sound, is that there is a lot of things coming out really frequently, and basically a lot of visual, besides the music, a lot of visual references are also being like put out in the world. So there's so many different visual styles, different covers, different, like, from varying from illustration to typography to like back then, like really raw 3D high gloss designs, a lot of different cultures, from for colors, from black and white, like going all the way to the spectrum of like bright colors and neons and so on. Like all these visual stimulus like got me so hooked that I was, even though like I was still young and I still didn't do a lot of design work back then. Like all these things were basically just like piling up back in my head, and basically waiting a moment to sort of like get out, and for me, like waiting for me to start working. Um, and with like basically all these things throughout the years, like the first couple of years spent in Paris, um, I sort of like started, as I told you, like I started building and compiling this fundus of things and bits and pieces and influences that were coming from the culture that was um, mine. I discovered it, and they were like really intimate for me, and that's why, and for me, they were intimate as much as the work will become intimate in like further down the line. So what's going to happen right now, I'm just going to give you a fast forward a couple of years. I'm not going to dwell too much on like what happened in between, even though there were some pretty significant things, but a couple of things, just because I know there's a lot of you from faculty listening, and I hope you're enjoying this elevator music. It's soothing in the background. Um, a few of the things. So I haven't finished faculty, so I don't have a master degree. I tried to get into Art Deco in Paris, and I was missing like zero point 0.1 point to get in. I didn't get into. I tried to get into Faculty of Applied Arts in Belgrade. Same thing. I flopped. Um, and eventually, I applied to get into Rietveld in Amsterdam. I got there, but I started working. It was in 2002. I started working, and it was sort of like really nice. I didn't want to leave, and also like I had a different plan. Actually, I wanted to go to Paris back and spend some more time there. So I actually decided not to go to get it refilled. So that's one of the things that at the same time, based on the perspective and the point of view where I am right now, I think it was actually a good decision. But on the other hand, like I'm always thinking of all those moments where um, you have the interaction with your like fellow mates from your class, where you guys are building and like thinking about the future, or exchanging ideas, or I mean like having someone who's going to guide you, because the things that I did in my life, I learned them myself, and I learned them the hard way. It wasn't always easy and fun, but it was an amazing experience, and something that really paid off for me. um, so what I'm gonna do right now, I'm gonna get you to somewhat like 8 years ago, and the start of what I would say is the sort of like the maturity of my life and my work. And that's basically in 2011, late 2000, no, early 2011. I started a studio with another fellow that you guys probably know of or have heard of. It's Bratislav Milenkovic. And so basically, two of us came up with the idea one night of, we were just like talking. He knew my work, I knew his work, and we sort of like clicked immediately. And we were talking about this idea and the lack of sort of like a concise and design-focused studio in Serbia back then, because there was a lot of agencies and like branding agencies and all those things that actually were covering sort of like just one aspect of design and production field, while we were thinking of the field which was more oriented towards culture, like design that was not only in that isn't only being made for production or like consumerism, like pure consumerism, but was sort of like elevated a little bit further and like had like this emotional connection as well. But also another thing that was that this was basically the playground for us to experiment and to come up with some other points of views and ideas. And this was the first sort of working space we had. As you can see, it's pretty much nothing. A desk with a couple of books, and that's it. But it was a space where we actually started building some of the first things that little did we know from the get-go will get us like really propulsed fairly quickly. So one of those things is the branding and the visual identity for the Mixer Festival 2012. I'm not going to go too much into detail, just because there's a lot of things that I want to show you, and a lot of things that I want to cover. But basically, this is somewhere where we actually learned the hard way that like working together and like having a partner besides you isn't always an easy thing, even though like you would think that people who connect and agree on certain things, just having someone on the side doesn't mean that the work is going to be quicker or faster, but it means that like just connecting and talking to someone and actually understanding someone is much more important or as important as the work itself. So this was honestly like the test for Bratislav and me, just sort of like coming together, and especially in particularly like on such a big project, because there was so many different bits and pieces. We came up with a pretty simple system, but just the application and the production of all these materials, because it was for a festival, was insanely a big test, and and it's sort of like as well like a countless sleepless night one that, you know, like after a couple of months of working on this, and I think we worked like for like good 4 or 5 months just preparing everything, like we just came out and we were completely exhausted. After this, or actually at the same time with this branding for Mixer Festival, came up with we did this branding and identity for Moritz Ice, which is actually was really a good exercise as well. And along the way, this proved to be actually a little bit of kind of like not a taboo project, but an interesting, or actually it became like an interesting anecdote out of this. And we were talking like a couple of years after we finished this project, actually, the owner, Moritz Fried, who's actually from Austria, and that's like why this entire branding and identity sort of like looks and feels like Vienna, like Wiener Werkstatt. Like that was sort of like the inspiration behind. He came to us and told us like, hey, Nemanja, couple of people came into my shop the other day, and told me that they saw our ice cream in Vienna, and they were like, they really loved it in Vienna, and they like tried it and they had so much fun. But actually, the thing is that this ice cream parlor back then existed only in Belgrade, in Serbia. Even though, like right now, he has a couple of more shops, but he still doesn't have the shop in Vienna, which actually was an interesting anecdote, just because it showed like how well and how good we kind of like managed to capture this moment and like this the energy of Wiener Werkstatt and like the whole Vienna scene, and translate it into like something so simple and so sophisticated and kind of like timeless. And these two projects were kind of like the first spark. After this came the cabinet brewery, branding and packaging system. This project is something that kind of like, at least for me as a creative, gave an interesting set, and that was uh, working with the client is never an easy thing. And for me, client was back then was this sort of like other entity, or like a foreign body almost, right? And until all like after basically working with cabinet, I understood that working with client is not a one-way stream, but it's actually a collaboration. And this project taught me that. I came out of this project as with something that if you want to build a brand, or if you want to do design for someone, it needs to be a two-way stream. So you need to understand what the other side wants, but also the other side needs to have the understanding of what you're doing and what are you trying to say. Because as much as someone is paying you guys to do this work, this is also something very personal. And because it's coming from you, it's coming from inside of you, and it's coming from within you. So I mean, I don't want to say that we are being sort of like emotionally insulted if someone doesn't or does confront your work, or sort of like challenges your work, but it actually means that they need to understand that this is basically coming out of you. And that's something that I understood like really strongly after this one. But I also like understood that another thing is, you always need to believe in your work, and you need to push your work. And even though if you fail once, I mean, it's always trying to push if you believe and trust in your idea. And that was, with this project, really proved to be totally right. Um, we also did the Exquisite Corpse exhibition, which was after this we did this exhibition that was actually I think like one of the first international exhibitions in Belgrade that sort of like surrounded a lot of uh, internationally recognized design studios in one place. And the problem with this exhibition, I mean, not the problem, but the only side thing with this exhibition was that it just lasted for a week, because sort of the amount of time we put in and the energy we invested, and the whole process of gathering all the artworks from different collaborators took almost like 2.5 months for something that would be mounted on in a day and put down after a week. It was a little bit um, uh, it was a little bit sad to see it go that quick, but on the other hand, like, it was really fulfilling just being able to interact with all these people and just like to talk with peers, with people that actually influenced or somehow like got in touch with you on some visual level, like you had the ability of like working and talking to them and interacting with them, and like just this was an amazing process just from like so many different aspects. And and I mean, if you guys haven't seen the show or haven't had the ability, because it was 8 years ago right now, there's still an online gallery, and I'll leave we'll see like at the end of the presentation, I'm gonna leave the link so you guys can check it out. But definitely worth checking it out, because there's a lot of really good work, and the whole idea and the whole concept of it is pretty interesting. I'm not gonna go too deep into it. You can check it out later. Um, Another thing that happened along the way, because my process of work is kind of like not linear. Although every time I start with the same single white page, I open a document. It's an A4 size desktop, and I always start with the same thing. I kind of like throughout the work sort of I start with an A4, but I end up with like 4 by 5 meter sort of like screen, just like working all over the place. And this exhibition is my first solo exhibition that I did in 2015, and was actually a kind of like an homage or inspiration that I got from all these different phases of my work and the research that I do, because I research so much, and I'm just like every time I make a line, I like kind of like take that line, put it on the side, duplicate it, made another one, and like just like start building on. And as along the way, when I look on my projects, like every project sort of like has this chronology of how I started and how I got to the very end. And that space in between the start and the end of the project, there is so much body of work that I could probably like invest that work and I don't know, just like put a different name on and sell it to a different client sometimes, you know. And this exhibition is actually that middle phase, that part that actually have never been seen by anyone. And I was just going through all those files and trying to find like the best moments. And these are just some of the couple of moments captured on camera from my exhibition. There's a couple of more. There was a couple of more murals that I did. I did this light installation, and so on. All like these things can be seen if you want to go a little bit deeper, or if you got interested by this. Like everything is on my website as well. Like you can check it out definitely. But this was really dear and fun to me, just because first time is like as long as I did my work. Like this is the first time that I actually exhibited myself as who I am as a creative, and this is the first time that I sort of experienced me as a creative for myself. Like that was kind of like a prolific moment for me as a creative, and a very important one, because things that happened after this are sort of like the next chapter and the next episode in my creative thinking. And right before, I mean, not right after this, 2 years after this, I had the opportunity also of working on the branding and the visual identity for Resonate Festival. Um, I think like this project is interesting just because, again, it's an cultural event. There's from art, design, and music, and sort of like all these elements are being combined together. But as well, like there were instances that needed to be fulfilled, and some of which are they had a lot of problems with the way they were communicating, like what was happening in the more like during the day, and like things that were happening in the evening and so on. And so like there was a lot of problems just like trying to figure out like how with a simple visual identity and like a really simple message try to showcase this plethora of different stages, different day frames, and also different categories, because as I said, like they had arts and music and even coding and so on. And this is a really interesting and a simple sort of like visual, but like really strong system that finally like worked out perfectly as well. These are just a couple of bits because I didn't want to go too far, but it's just like showing a little bit of like how every project for now, like as you can see, like every project is so different, and every project is completely as its own. It's sort of like works for itself, and it stands alone, and that's like something that's very important. I think like within your work, just like trying to find your voice is a good thing, but also exploring and sort of like not setting down with just like one single thing that you do, but sort of like having this like broad spectrum is much better. And this, like for instance, like shows that same year I also did another visual identity for another festival, this for another conference this time. um, and this was a digital conference, Vox Days Belgrade. It's basically the biggest conference around code and everything that's digital. And basically, like this was an interesting platform, and like just working with these guys who are completely like so nice and so fun and so quirky, and just building these sets of like digital 3D visual sort of like these little creatures, and the whole identity around this. I'm not going to show you everything. You can see these things online. Um, just like it was super interesting, like working in a different medium. I didn't do these 3D. Like I sketched them, and then I worked closely with another friend of mine who does 3D. But just like the experience of like going from within the same year, going from something that's like really simple and flat and sort of like two-dimensional, and going and experiencing something that's three-dimensional and has like a completely different look to it, like got me sort of like complete like changed my view on things at that time, just because thinking in 3D and like trying to understand things in space are so much different. And it's one thing to have it like just on a paper, but the other thing is like trying to understand like how every different angle and like how the light and all these things can affect 3D objects. So this was, for me as a creative, like was an interesting experience, just like working on a project. And then with the studio, there was a lot of different projects and other things that I did and I worked on along the way. I'm not going to go through all of them. I just like left this as kind of like a small kind of like a last step in showing the work that I did with my studio. And this actually gets me to the next chapter, which is the current state of affairs, and that's basically the place where I am now. So what Ivana said at the beginning, like right now I'm in the United States. I'm working as a senior designer at Nike Global Brand Creative. And but to understand this, I didn't come to the United States straight to Nike. First, I was brought here by Wyden and Kennedy, which is the largest global advertising agency and one of the best ones. And I mean, not one, the best advertising agency. And I had the opportunity to get here with the luck, and I was invited by this amazing creative who unfortunately left the company 1 month before I came in. And this sort of like this him leaving the company and me coming in and like already sort of like setting things and like just leaving everything, working on my visa, preparing things, and him giving me a call 1 month before I'm supposed to come in and telling me that he's leaving sort of like was at the same time like a small alert, but on the other hand, like it was something of a kind of like a decision whether I'm gonna go and into the unknown and see what's gonna happen, or am I gonna say like, okay, I'm not taking this chance. I'm gonna stay in Belgrade and the like forget about the whole USA and the sort of like the idea and the opportunity of like doing something else. And luckily, I decided not to. So I came to Wyden, even though he wasn't there, and my background is in branding. Wyden and Kennedy's advertising company, and the idea that this guy, whose name is Guy, by the way, had was basically he wanted to build a branding studio within the agency, and he wanted me with a few other people to sort of like lead this place. He left. This idea fell down. Nothing happened. And basically, I was stuck as a branding type, design oriented creative within the agency that was making and doing advertising. And I'm sort of like always finding my way around, and I found projects or projects came to me, and I didn't do a lot because I didn't spend too much time at Wyden. I spent in total 10 months. But within those 10 months, one of the things that I did and that I worked for is this piece. And so every time when you eat chicken at KFC, and with every bite, I hope you guys remember me and you have, and you at least think of me. So I had the opportunity of redesigning and reshaping the KFC logo, which for me was the first sort of like, this is the opportunity, and these are the things and the level and that I can and should be working on. And this got me really excited. And also just coming like with the background and like coming from a smaller environment, a smaller surrounding, being at the forefront of things and having the ability to touch work that can affect not thousands but millions of people is like really sort of like a big thing of respect. And I'm just going to quote, or I'm going to try to quote, but with great power comes great responsibility. Well, that's basically something that I learned here. And I mean, you need to be humble with your work, and you need to understand the work, and you need to understand the importance of the work, and like whatever you do, like how actually it affects other people. And this piece was the first one that actually like gave me that idea of, wow, like I can actually do and make something, and that's going to be seen by millions of people in matters of couple of seconds. And that's something that happened. But as I said, I didn't spend too much time at Wyden, 10 months in total. But I did some work for Nike as well. And because Nike, I don't know if you guys know that, or probably some of you do, but for those who don't, Nike is based in Portland. Nike is a Portland company. It started in Portland. And the connection between Wieden and Kennedy and Nike was basically always really tight. And so, because I did a lot of work as well for Nike while at Wieden, I sort of like was thinking like, okay, I think that this should be the next step, and I think I should go further. And because I'm creative and I'm restless, and I still have so much ideas and so much things that I want to put out in the world, I think, and I was thinking that it would be a better match for me if I went to Nike. So my next basically chapter in the current one that I'm in is Nike. I'm just gonna go really quickly because there's a couple of more slides, and I think I'm already going too far and taking too much time. I had the opportunity as day one that I came in to work on a couple of substantial projects. So one of them was working on supporting typeface for Air Innovation Platform. So basically, Air Innovation Platform, you all guys know Air Max, Vapor Max, all those shoes with air in them. Well, basically, that's the Air Innovation Platform, and I had the team that I came in, they were already working on rebranding the Air. They basically needed the Air supporting typeface, and since I'm my biggest and strongest part of being creative is type design, and I love to do and create type. So I basically came up with this typeface that afterwards was going to be used on every product from any Air Max shoe. So anytime you see an Air Max shoe, you will see this, to like the Air Zoom, Vapor Max. So this was very important, like, and also a first time for me to work on something that doesn't need only to convey a message, but there is also a technical aspect of this typeface. And one of the things is that I had to sort of like take in consideration the idea that this is something that's going to go on product, and that is going to be placed on a like pretty small scale. And especially, I mean, although there is a lot of techniques, and at Nike we are trying really to craft in the best possible way, just having that as a back idea of like this needs to be applied in a small way, or like even embossed in a shoe, or like all these different things, or something that for me as a creative and as well as a type designer was pretty sort of like an interesting kind of like a problem to solve, right? And I'm just going to show you a couple of moments. This is a product that actually is bearing the first product. This is the Alpha Fly that just came out, and it has the Air Zoom, as you can see on the airbag. And just afterwards, seeing that something as small as this can have such a big impact was very important. Then again, another project that I did with this team was Space Hippie. And this project was as well pretty big within Nike, because basically this was the first collection that came out as a fully sustainable product. So basically the shoes were made out of scrap shoes. So they would like take all these old products, or the material that it basically like falls on the floor, or like the leftovers. They would basically like regrinding them, repurposing them, washing them, and like just building new products out of this. And that's why the name of sort of like space and hippie, it's sort of like the future, but it's also green, and like we're thinking about the future, about tomorrow, and like the carbon footprint, like all these ideas in mind sort of like led to this like really kind of like retro futuristic type design and exploration. And this is the branding that's on the product. So yeah, this is how the product actually looks. And as well, I mean, just having this product and seeing my work being applied on it, because I worked as well closely with different parties, because we, like, Nike is a huge entity and we have like different departments. I mean, within brand creative, but there's also product design, there's footwear design teams, and just like working with footwear team on this and like thinking of like how this is going to be applied, and like what are different techniques of applying this branding on, like how these things are all coming together is like a really teamwork, and it's not something that's being done by like one person or being taught through by one person. It's like a collective idea. um, Another thing that I worked on, just like really quickly, and I'm wrapping up right now. Like it was for Kyrie 6. It's the product that came out last year, something somewhere around like June, July. Unfortunately, this one didn't go through, didn't see the light of the day, but was yet like one really interesting experience. Um, just working with a different, because my like the team that I worked in, we're working on like brand projects, mainly concepting, and this was campaign work. So it's completely different flow and work stream, and there is different aspects of like how the message is being perceived, and what the type work is actually supporting, and like the significance of type work, because the things that you've seen earlier have much more thought and took a year and a half of developing. While this work, when you're doing a campaign work, it's a seasonal work, which means it has its beginning and the end. And there's much more freedom and much more flexibility in doing that work. And that's why like I just wanted to show this work and share it, because it's a little bit more expressive, and it can be a little bit more abstract if you want, because it sort of like has its specific time. And the other thing is that with this work, seasonal or campaign work at Nike, like you have much more freedom and liberty to explore. And that was pretty interesting, like as well, working with a different team, like working with a completely different set of creatives from Nike basketball was an interesting one. And so I want to come with a really quick conclusion, because so far I sort of like gave you not a really quick one, because it took me a while, and I'm sorry about that. Um, I wanted to come to a conclusion and like actually circle back to the beginning of my lecture, and actually to the first slide. And these are some of the things that along the way, with everything that I just showed you and the things that I showcased, these are the things that I actually haven't learned, and I probably won't be able to learn them for like probably until I continue, or like until I stop working. So one of them is how to be conventional. And um, I think like being conventional in my sense, and like my things, and my creative output is like impossible. I'm always trying to get like the craziest thing out there, and if it doesn't work, then I'm sort of like I'm gonna chop it down and get to sort of like that spot that everybody's gonna say, oh yeah, but I'm always gonna try with something that's completely different, and like doesn't like it does tell the story, but it's unexpected, right? Second thing is never question authority, and this is something that I always do. Sometimes you get in trouble with this, but I think it's good because you got to trust yourself and you got to trust your guts. And although there are always people who are deciding, who are above, even though like it could be a client or it can be your superior that you're working for or whoever, like there are things that you know and that you learned, and there's also always that gut feeling. So I always try to sort of like oppose an opinion whenever I have the opportunity to do that. Um, I never learn from my mistakes, and although I think this is uh, in some instances a bad thing, I also think it got me to where I am right now. So I think like if you're keeping mistakes, uh, whenever you make them next time, just be a little bit more aware of like what kind of like decision you're making when you're making that same mistake, because what proves to be a mistake on one project actually can be a good thing on the other. Things are always what they seem. Well, they're not, and I'm just gonna stick with that. I never learned to give up. That led me to a lot of fights with, or I mean, not fights, but arguments with people. And I'm never giving up. I'm never giving up in work and life. I can't settle with mediocre. I'm never gonna say like, oh, okay, let's leave it as like this. Always gonna try to push the work as far as I feel comfortable with it. I'm never just gonna finish and do something and say like that's it. And the last thing, well, as you all know so far, and it took me a while, is when to stop. So with this, I'm gonna stop. I'm gonna leave you with a couple of links. You can follow me on Instagram. You can always go to my .com page, I'm sorry, my .rs page. It hasn't been updated for a while, but there is still a lot of body, like a substantial body of work there. You can also visit the Exquisite Corpse exhibition. For those who haven't seen it, there's a video of that documents the exhibition. There's there's a lot of images. There's the whole synopsis of the exhibition and so on. So like if someone's interested, definitely go and check it out. And yeah, that was it. Thank you for listening and thank you for tuning in. And I hope I didn't bore you. And now I'm just going to take a sip of water.